I'm just wondering, if not, as you're saying, the Vietnam is rather a reckless exit strategy executed by Dr. Kissinger. Is there any good example we can examine for an exit strategy in military intervention, particularly after World War II?
Well,
Is there any? I'm sorry.
yeah, that's a great question. Is there any kind of model for how to do this correctly? History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So I do think that we can draw lessons from the past, and especially when we're looking at what are the attributes that go into a peace agreement that we know work. And I'm seeing 4 students here who've had this as their final exam. Um, give me the 14 best practices that must exist. This Vietnam peace agreement has none of them, by the way, that are recognizable. There's the U.S. Institute for Peace that does some of the work, I think, that you're talking about. The U.S. Institute for Peace is a bipartisan organization funded by Congress, well, at least it was last time I checked, funded by Congress, and it brings practitioners from around the world together to come up with these negotiating ideas. And they always come back to the same model, which is the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement, because it involved all the different aspects that we know must be present to decommission armies, to release political prisoners, to integrate economies, at least until the Brexit. Now we're seeing in the news now that hard border in the north of Ireland is going to be the issue. I sit on a commission in Dublin that we oversee this, and so this is what we're tackling right now, is looking at if Brexit goes through in March, what happens to that border? Do you have to build a wall? But the Good Friday Agreement checked a lot of the boxes on best practices. So those of us who teach courses on ending deadly conflict, that's sort of the model that we look at on how to extricate nations and subnational groups from intractable conflicts. This one, in the end, as Senator George Aiken said from Vermont, you went home. Right? That's why when Susan says, could you have gotten this in 1969? Well, if you're going to go home and leave North Vietnamese troops in the field of battle, facing down Saigon, you can do that whenever you want. And that's what the North Vietnamese kept saying. Kissinger would come back and say, well, we've got a 23-month withdrawal process. And Kissinger says, it took you laid to us says, it took you 5 months to get them here. Surely you can get them out quicker than 2 years. And in the end, if that's what you're doing, if you're, in the end, going to trade American prisoners of war for a complete unilateral U.S. withdrawal, do it.
Can I follow up on Good Friday Agreement? What do you think that's preventing the treaty? For many would say today in Northern Ireland, there's basically no government. It's a failed state. What do you think of what's the problem?
Well, I wouldn't actually characterize the Stormont in that way. I would say that actually there is a huge civil society in the north of Ireland. That what made it, however, and this is why, this gets back to this is not a plant, but this gets back to my point exactly, and to your question that started it off. The most important people in the immediate post-Good Friday Agreement period were the architects, literally architects, who were going to take all that EU investment money and build a completely non-identity downtown in Belfast. They were going to build a new riverfront and new buildings that were going to be non-sectarian. And that's what they did. Right? So Belfast gets a complete makeover. And so there's not east of the river and west of the river anymore. There's the riverfront. That's exactly what I'm talking about here that's needed. None of that kind of vision is going on in the Paris peace talks. None of it. It gets back to something else that Susan said. So in your very first questions about strategy, doesn't this seem like an odd mix? You're going to believe in negotiations, but you're going to supervise and continue the heaviest bombing in the history of mankind, 8 million tons of bombs? How do you reconcile those two things? And it's because they could never give up the ghost. Nixon and Kissinger always kind of secretly hoped that Hanoi would bend the knee. Kissinger said to Nixon, this is, quote, "That raggedy-ass country, fourth-rate country, has a breaking point." Contempt. And wrong. Right? And so that's in the macro. There are lots of things that we need to do in peace agreements. The United States needs to get much, much better at being an honest broker and an architect in peace agreements. Hopefully the U.S. Institute of Peace helps. Kissinger can be a theorist, but I don't think we want him constructing that kind of a world. I think we need a lot of the young people that are here today, stay in your majors, whatever they are, and work on these kind of issues. Right? And I do think at the end of the day, Good Friday is a good model forward, but Vietnam continues to offer us incredibly important lessons on how to conduct our foreign affairs, how to conduct the United States footprint in the world, how other powers see us, how small countries react to us. At the end of the day, you can always find out that there's no political corollary to your overwhelming political power. A great theorist said that, Henry Kissinger.